Okay, in this video lecture, I am going to go through 10.2, part 3, looking at the electron transport chain. So if we back up, okay, and talk about where we have gone, like this diagram. We started off with glucose, and how when we split glucose through a series of reactions, we have a net gain of 2 ATP, 2 pyruvic acid, and 2 NADHs. And those NADHs go to the ETC. And then the pyruvic acid enters the mitochondria in the presence of oxygen, and it's going to go through a series of reactions and produce 2 ATP, 6 molecules of CO2, and 8 NADH and 2 FADH2, which are electron carriers. And so now we're going to talk about what those electron carriers do and how they pay off in the long run in creating a whole bunch of energy that our cells use. So let's jump into it. So the ETC uses these high energy electrons from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle to synthesize ATP from ADP, because so far we've only made 4 ATP, and that's not a lot, even though your cell can do those steps very, very quickly, but it's still not a lot. Okay, so here we're going to dive in. Specifically, we're still in the mitochondria, but the membrane between the matrix and the intercellular space. And you can see here that our electron carriers are going to drop off their electrons, and the electrons are going to travel through the ETC, much like in photosynthesis, where they travel through the ETC and hydrogen gets pumped across. Same thing. They're going to travel through the ETC and hydrogen is going to get pumped across. So now we have this high concentration of protons, or H pluses, in the intermembrane space, and they are going to flow through an enzyme called ATP synthase, which takes ADP and a phosphate and smacks it together to create ATP. We're also going to create water in this process. So in the Krebs cycle, that's where the carbon dioxide comes from, but another product in cellular respiration is water, and water is made through the ETC reactions. So in the location in eukaryotes, it's going to be the inner membrane of the mitochondria, but in prokaryotes, it actually happens in their cell membrane because they don't have organelles. The products that we're going to see, our electron carrier NADH is going to drop off electrons, so then it's going to turn into NAD+, and they're going to go back to either Krebs or glycolysis to pick up more electrons. FADH2 is going to drop off electrons and become FAD, and then that will go back to the Krebs cycle. And then ATP is going to be made, and then water, okay, because it's going to pick up electrons and combine with oxygen to form water. So here's where we've gone. Glucose gets split into pyruvic acid through glycolysis. There's my NADHs, my ATP. It's going to move on to the Krebs cycle. You can see how carbon dioxide is made, but we generate a whole bunch of electron carriers, and then we're going to drop off those electrons in the ETC, pump hydrogen across, and which will flow through the ATP synthase to generate a whole bunch of ATP. So steps: NADH and FADH2 drop off electrons in the ETC. And then these electrons will travel through, pump in H plus ions across, and then when the electrons reach the end of the ETC, they will leave, and they will combine with oxygen and some protons, as well as those electrons, and form water. And then those hydrogen ion concentration that's built up in the intermembrane space, the cell is going to do something called chemiosmosis to produce ATP. So they will flow through the ATP synthase to create a whole bunch of energy in this form of ATP. So the totals when oxygen is present, okay, when you think about it, in glucose the net gain was 2, and then the Krebs cycle was 2, but just from the electron carriers dropping off their electrons and traveling through the ETC and pumping H plus across, you can get 32 ATPs. And so when you add it all up, you get 36 electrons. That is a lot of energy, 36 ATP molecules for every molecule of glucose, which is huge. So where did each molecule come from? Glucose comes from food. Oxygen comes from the atmosphere that we breathe. Carbon dioxide is made in the Krebs cycle. Water is made in the ETC. and energy is made in both glycolysis, I should say, in all three, glycolysis, Krebs, and the ETC. And then we could probably ask, like, where does it go, right? Oxygen is used in ETC, glucose goes to glycolysis, carbon dioxide is made in, comes from, where does it go? It goes to the Krebs cycle, and then it's released in the atmosphere. Water is released from the organism, and then we use that energy. So that does it for 10.2 ETC.